"Is this a joke to you? Look at this filth!" The voice of Mark Thompson, sharp and cold, cut through the quiet morning hum of the Sterling Corp lobby in downtown Chicago. He pointed a polished shoe at a barely visible scuff mark on the marble floor. Arthur, the building's elderly janitor, squinted to see what he was talking about. Before he could respond, Mark kicked the yellow mop bucket with a sudden violent motion. Soapy water sloshed across the pristine floor, soaking the cuffs of Arthur's worn trousers. "Clean it up, old man, and be glad I don't fire you on the spot for incompetence," Mark sneered, adjusting his expensive tie. He turned and walked away, leaving the 70-year-old man standing in a puddle of humiliation. But Mark had no idea who he had just threatened. Arthur had worked at Sterling Corp for over 20 years. He was as much a part of the building as the steel beams that held it up. He arrived every morning before the sun rose over Lake Michigan and left long after the last employee turned off their computer. He knew the building's every secret, the creak of every floorboard, the hum of the elevators. His movements were slow but deliberate, his work meticulous. He was a quiet man with kind eyes that held the weight of a long life. Mark Thompson, on the other hand, was new. He was a 35-year-old MBA graduate, driven by ambition and a complete lack of patience. He saw Arthur not as a person, but as a slow, outdated piece of equipment that needed to be replaced. From his first week as the new building manager, Mark made Arthur his personal project. He followed him on his rounds, pointing out imaginary dust and non-existent smudges. He wanted to build a case to prove that the old man was no longer fit for the job. Only one person seemed to notice the daily cruelty. Sarah, the young woman at the reception desk, always had a warm smile for Arthur. She brought him a cup of coffee every morning and asked about his grandchildren. She saw the way Mark's words chipped away at the old man's quiet dignity. She saw the slight tremble in Arthur's hands after each confrontation. Her heart ached for him, but she was just a receptionist. What could she do? The campaign of humiliation escalated. One afternoon, Mark publicly reprimanded Arthur for taking his scheduled 15-minute break. "Breaks are for productive employees, Arthur, not for those who can barely push a broom," he announced loudly in the busy cafeteria. The words hung in the air, and several employees looked down at their plates, ashamed to meet Arthur's gaze. Arthur simply nodded, put his half-eaten sandwich away, and went back to work. Sarah watched from her desk, her blood boiling. The next day, she decided to act. She waited for Mark to be alone in his office and knocked gently. "Mr. Thompson, could I speak with you for a moment?" Mark looked up, annoyed. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It's about Arthur. I think the way you speak to him is unfair."
"He's a good man, and he works very hard." Mark's face hardened. He stood up and leaned over his desk, his voice a low threat. "Let me be clear, Sarah. You are a receptionist. Your job is to answer phones and greet visitors. It is not to question my management style. Arthur is an underperforming asset, and I am dealing with him. If you value your job, you will go back to your desk and forget this conversation ever happened." Sarah left his office, defeated and scared. The message was clear. Stay silent or you're next. The pressure was becoming unbearable for Arthur. He was old, he was tired, and his spirit was beginning to break. That evening, he sat in his small apartment in the Pilsen neighborhood and wrote a letter of resignation. His hands shook as he formed the words. He was done. He would leave with what little dignity he had left. He folded the letter and placed it in his work bag, ready to hand it in the next morning. But as he prepared for bed, His eyes fell upon a faded photograph on his nightstand. It was him and his late wife, Maria, standing on this very spot 25 years ago, when it was just an empty lot. They had poured their life savings into this dream, the Sterling Corp Tower. Maria had passed away just after it was completed, but Arthur promised her he would always watch over it, always be a part of it. He picked up the photo, his thumb tracing her smiling face. He couldn't quit. He couldn't let a man like Mark Thompson chase him away from his own legacy. He tore up the resignation letter and threw the pieces away. His renewed resolve was immediately tested. The following week, Mark made his most vicious move yet. A gold-plated pen, a gift from a previous employer that he kept on his desk as a status symbol, went missing. Without any evidence, Mark immediately accused Arthur. He called security to the main lobby and demanded they search the janitor's cart and his personal belongings in front of everyone. 2 security guards reluctantly patted Arthur down and rummaged through his cart. The old man stood silently, his face a mask of shame, as employees whispered and stared. Sarah watched in horror, tears welling in her eyes. Of course, they found nothing. The pen was later found by Mark himself, having fallen behind his desk. He offered no apology. The damage was done. The accusation of theft, even though false, now followed Arthur down the hallways. The day of the annual investors' meeting arrived. It was the most important day of the year for Sterling Corp. Mark was a whirlwind of nervous energy, barking orders and checking every detail. The CEO of the entire parent company was flying in from New York for the meeting. Everything had to be perfect. As the final preparations were underway, Mark spotted it. A single, tiny fingerprint on the main glass entrance door that Arthur had just finished polishing. That was the final straw. Mark's carefully controlled composure shattered.
He stormed into the lobby where Arthur was putting away his supplies. "Are you blind?" he screamed, his voice echoing in the vast space. Important clients and executives who were arriving for the meeting stopped and stared. "I told you I wanted this place immaculate. Is that so hard to understand?" Arthur began to speak, but Mark cut him off. "I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses. I've had it with you. You're finished. You're fired. Get your things and get out of my building now. You are a useless old fossil, and I never want to see your face again." He pointed a trembling finger toward the exit, his own face red with fury. At that exact moment, the polished brass doors of the central elevator slid open with a soft chime. A distinguished-looking man in his late 40s, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, stepped out. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos in the lobby. This was David Sterling, the CEO. Mark's face instantly changed from rage to a sickeningly sweet smile. He rushed forward, extending a hand. "Mr. Sterling, welcome! A pleasure to have you. Please don't mind the commotion, just taking out some trash." He gestured dismissively toward Arthur. David Sterling completely ignored Mark's outstretched hand. His eyes scanned the lobby and locked onto the old janitor. A wide, warm smile spread across his face, a smile that erased all the tension from his features. He walked past the stunned manager and went straight to Arthur. He wrapped his arms around the old man in a tight, loving hug. The entire lobby fell into a shocked silence. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. David pulled back, still holding Arthur's shoulders, his voice full of affection. "Dad," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I told you to retire 5 years ago. What are you still doing working here?" Mark Thompson froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale as a ghost. His jaw hung open. "Dad?" He looked from the powerful CEO to the humble janitor, his mind struggling to connect the two.
The janitor, Arthur, was Arthur Sterling, the founder, the owner of the entire billion-dollar corporation, the man whose name was on the building. David Sterling's warm smile vanished as he turned to face Mark. His eyes were now like chips of ice. "What did you just call my father?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Mark began to stammer, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. I didn't know. I was just, Mr. Sterling, sir, it's a misunderstanding." David held up a hand, silencing him. He looked over at the reception desk. "Sarah," he said calmly, "please tell me what's been going on here." Empowered by his kindness, Sarah stood up tall. In a clear, steady voice, she recounted everything. She told him about the public insults, the false accusations, the constant harassment, and the final humiliating firing she had just witnessed.
The investors and clients in the lobby listened, their expressions turning from confusion to disgust. When she finished, David nodded slowly. He looked at Mark, whose entire body was trembling. "Mr. Thompson," David said, his voice void of any emotion, "go to your office. Pack your personal belongings. A security guard will escort you out of the building. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately." Mark opened his mouth to plead, but David cut him off. "And be assured, the story of how you treated the founder of this company will be well known in this city by the end of the day. You will not work in Chicago again." Mark, utterly broken, turned and shuffled away without another word. David then turned back to the reception desk. He walked over to Sarah, whose eyes were filled with tears of relief. "Sarah," he said gently, "thank you. Thank you for showing kindness when no one else would." He paused for a moment. "I'm creating a new position today, head of employee welfare for the entire corporation. The job is to ensure every single person who works for us is treated with dignity and respect. The job is yours if you want it. It comes with a substantial raise and your own office." Sarah could only nod, speechless, as tears of joy streamed down her face. Finally, David looked at his father. "All right, Dad, it's time. No more arguments. You're officially retired." Arthur Sterling smiled, a deep, genuine smile of peace. He looked at Sarah, then back at his son. "Okay, David, I'll retire. On one condition." He pointed to Mark Thompson's now empty office, the one with the best view of the city. "She gets that corner office." No fim das contas, o que aprendemos com isso é que o verdadeiro valor de uma pessoa não está em seu cargo, em seu terno caro ou em sua conta bancária. Está em seu caráter, na forma como trata os outros, especialmente aqueles que acreditam não terem poder. A humildade e a bondade são as verdadeiras medidas de uma pessoa, e a arrogância sempre encontra seu caminho para a ruína. Nunca se sabe a história por trás do rosto de um estranho. Se esta história tocou seu coração, por favor, demonstre seu apoio com um like e compartilhe seus pensamentos nos comentários abaixo. E não se esqueça de se inscrever no canal para mais narrativas da vida real que nos fazem refletir. Até a próxima história.